Hello everyone. I hope it's all working today. Sound, video, all the rest of it. I've got a huge amount of questions this week. There's loads of them. I honestly don't think I'm going to get through them all, but I'll work through them as best I can, and we'll see how we go with them. Trying to keep an eye on the comments as well. So the first one is quite an interesting one. It says, "Hi William, I joined this group just a few days ago. I'm actively cutting down my drinking and hope to maintain abstinence. My big problem at the moment is that I can't concentrate on my writing. I'm in the latter stages of writing my PhD social anthropology. My focus and concentration are shot, and I'm sure it is the alcohol. Something about how alcohol affects our brain would be super useful and interesting." So I might be missing my mark here, but I suspect this might be someone who has not read the book and not been on the website to have a look at what's on there. When you join the Facebook group, you are asked either to confirm that you've read the book or that you will at least go onto the website. And I suspect whoever's asked this hasn't done either, because on the website and in the book, there's a huge amount of information on this. And so, as I say, I might be missing my mark, but I suspect they haven't done this. If you haven't, please do get on there and at least go on the website and have a look. Absolutely, it will be ruining your concentration. So let me just explain one of thousands of elements, how it will affect your concentration. Alcohol is a sedative. Okay, so as a first off, it sedates things. So it's not going to help your concentration or help your intelligence if you're sedating yourself. But I'm assuming you're not writing while you're actually drinking. But what happens is, because your brain tries to counter the sedating effects of the alcohol, it becomes hypersensitive when you drink. Okay, so when you drink, you become sedated, and then you have a corresponding feeling of anxiety as it wears off. Now, when you sleep, you go through certain sleep cycles. So there's deep sleep, where you're very deeply unconscious. On the other end of the scale, there's something called REM sleep, which you're almost fully awake for. When the researchers put electrodes and sensors on people and monitor them through REM sleep, their brain lights up almost as if they're fully awake. So when you sleep, you go through these processes of going like very deeply asleep and then almost fully awake and then back down again. And when you go through these sleep cycles naturally, you wake up feeling alert, ready to go, good to go for a good day. When you drink alcohol, you interrupt that, because for the first part of the night, you're overly sedated. So you can't go into the higher levels of sleep like REM sleep. And when the alcohol wears off, you're oversensitized. So your body finds it very difficult to go to sleep at all. Or if it does go to sleep, it can't go into the deeper levels of sleep. So even if you're just having one or two drinks, you're ruining your night's sleep, which isn't going to help you writing your PhD in social anthropology. It's also interesting that you say about cutting down your drinking. That's the problem. Even just one or two of them is going to be ruining your sleep. And that's going to have a massive impact on concentration, intelligence, everything. There's studies too numerous to mention about when people are starved of sleep, their concentration goes, all sorts of things. So yes, absolutely it will be. And as I say, I assume you're not actually drinking while you're writing it. Obviously, if you're doing that, then you're causing yourself even more problems. Someone else says, a thought on an old question: what's the success on people that have had a long break of alcohol? Then are there any that can go back to having a drink now and again? Just wondering, or is it this just fantasy land? Wondering your real thoughts on this, and I know you will be truthful, William Porter. Yeah, I always am truthful on this subject. So I don't think it's possible, and let me explain why. I've just been talking about the physiological effects. So when you drink a drink, you have a sort of sedated feeling, and when it wears off because of the way your brain reacts to it, you have a corresponding feeling of anxiety. That corresponding feeling of anxiety is the alcohol withdrawal. Okay, it's an unpleasant feeling that is the direct result that you get when a dose of a drug wears off. and is most easily resolved by taking another dose of the drug. Because obviously, if you're overly sensitized because your brain's geared up to work under the sedating effects of alcohol and that's making you feel anxious, if you put more alcohol in your system, you're bringing yourself back to a normal level and sedating that feeling of anxiety. So that's the alcohol withdrawal. Where problem drinking comes in is when your subconscious starts to recognize that another dose of alcohol will relieve the unpleasant feeling caused when the previous drink wears off. So let me just give you a hypothetical example. We all know somebody who can have one or two drinks and then just stop. Okay, that person will suffer the withdrawal. Okay, but they will just sit there and there will be like an unpleasant niggly feeling. Most of the time people sleep through it, to be honest, because people go to bed. Usually we have a few drinks before we go to bed, so they will actually sleep through it anyway, and it will disturb their sleep and they will be more tired the next day, but they won't really notice that. And if they do stay up, it will just be kind of an unpleasant out of thoughts feeling and they won't really do much with it. But when you start drinking more regularly, your brain starts to pick up on the fact that when you have that feeling, another alcoholic drink will relieve it. That is learned behavior. Okay. And what is learned cannot be unlearned. Okay. So I don't know, just pretend you don't know anything about maths and I sort of teach you the basics of maths and then teach you that 2 + 2 is 4. I can teach you that. I can never unteach you. It can never make you forget it, because when you know something like that, something factual, you can't ever unknow it. So for most people watching this, and for me, every time I've stopped drinking nearly 7 years now. If I lived another 100 years without drinking, I would still, every time I took an alcoholic drink and it wore off, there would be an unpleasant sort of feeling there. And my brain interprets that as I want another drink. And you don't want it, this is the problem with moderation. When the alcoholic drink wears off, you get that unpleasant feeling and you want another one to relieve that. Okay. You don't want it next week. You don't want it tomorrow. You don't want it in an hour's time or even 10 minutes time. You want it now. And that's the problem with moderation. You've got a choice with moderation. You either have that first drink and then it wears off and you have that unpleasant, anxious feeling. You've then got a choice of two. You sit there miserable and anxious, wanting another drink, but refusing to let yourself have one. Okay. Or the other option is you just have one. And then when that wears off, you have another one and another one and another one, and you get absolutely hammered because you're right back where you were in the first place. So I'm afraid that is the reality of moderation for the vast majority of people. It doesn't work. And even if it does work, it's horrible, because all you're doing is sitting there feeling anxious and miserable, wanting an alcoholic drink and not having one. And in fact, what most people find is they become more and more obsessed with alcohol because they're always thinking about whether they can have another drink or whether enough time has passed or whatever. They're not free and getting on with their lives. They're almost more dominated by alcohol than when they were just drinking freely. So it's absolutely horrendous. It's not what we think it is. Okay, so you do need to keep that in mind. This is an interesting one. How do you replace the feeling alcohol gives you? Or do you just see the feeling differently now once quitting, and one that you don't want? I've never tried to replace the feeling alcohol gave me. I would think the best way to do it would be perhaps to buy some fish or something that's quite out of date and eat it, and then go to bed and maybe set an alarm for 3 a.m, and then wake up and take a huge mug full of caffeine tablets and loads of black coffee. Then you'd be lying there feeling sick, really anxious, heart palpitations and probably sweats, probably tired but completely unable to go to sleep. And then you'd spend the whole rest of the day feeling kind of ill and shaky and completely washed out. So that I would suggest would be the best way of giving you the feeling alcohol gave you. If you wanted to really go to town on it, you can make sure you message a load of friends and relatives something really obnoxious and unpleasant just before you go to bed to cause a load of arguments. And I suppose equally you could take your keys and wallet and phone and throw them in the bin along with £100 or something. So obviously I'm being a bit facetious there. I assume what you're saying is that actual chemical feeling, but then what you're actually asking for then is you want a feeling that makes you slightly dulled and confused before wearing off, leaving a corresponding feeling of anxiety. Again, the best way you could do it is probably stay up for a few nights so you're feeling really like zombified and not really with it and tired and exhausted. And then the caffeine again would kick in, which would make you feel anxious. And that's really the sum total of it. I, obviously, again, just being silly, but I think what you're really asking for is that nice relaxation feeling you get from drinking alcohol. Okay, so to go back to the physiology of it, when an alcoholic drink wears off, you're left with like a corresponding feeling of anxiety. And then when you have an alcoholic drink, it really seems to hit the spot because you're relieving that anxiety and because your brain's oversensitized to work under the anething effects of the alcohol, but there's no alcohol. So when you put the alcohol back into the equation, you feel a lot better. Okay, so that very pleasant, calm, relaxed feeling you get when you have a drink is no more than you would feel if you hadn't had a drink in the first place. It's just taking your brain chemistry back to where it ought to be. And that feeling you get all the time when you quit drinking. Of course, you have bad days, but your default setting is that nice, relaxed position, especially in the evening when your day's work is done. That's what you naturally gravitate towards without having to have the drink. So you're not replacing it by cutting out alcohol, you're putting it there all the time. I think sometimes people think about substitutes and, of course they're not thinking about the nausea and the sweats and the heart palpitations and the anxiety and all the rest of it. What they're really asking for is something that genuinely relaxes you, something that genuinely helps you socialize with other people, something that you can take now and again. You don't have to take it all the time. You're not compelled to keep taking it over and over again because it's addictive, something that tastes good. But the problem is that's the exact opposite to alcohol, because alcohol is addictive. It does cause arguments. It does give you anxiety and palpitations and ruin your sleep. So that's what you need, I think, to really get to grips with. What you're thinking alcohol does for you, it doesn't do. Okay, it doesn't do it. You need to drill down and think to yourself, what is it I think, what is that feeling I think alcohol gives to me? Because if it's a calm, relaxing feeling, if you quit alcohol, you will have that all the time. Everything else is part and parcel of alcohol. The anxiety, the heart palpitations, the hangovers, all of it. You can't get the one without the other. So this is an interesting one. I'm reading Alcohol Explained for the first one for the second time. I'd like to hear you talk about the conscious versus the subconscious when trying to overcome cravings. So the subconscious has nothing directly to do with cravings. Okay, all the subconscious does is put the thought of an alcoholic drink into your head in certain circumstances. So if you're used to coming in from work and, well, not all the people coming from work these days, most of us are in lockdown, but whatever your situation is where you then naturally reach for a drink, the subconscious can kick in and put the thought of a drink in your head. That's all it can do. It just puts the thought there. Okay, that's the total sum of what the subconscious does. It's what you then do with your conscious mind with that thought that is the problem. And if you start fantasizing about a drink, that's when the craving kicks in. So I've talked about cravings before, and I think I did a talk not long ago purely about cravings. So I won't go too much on it. If you are interested in it, go onto the website and there's a fairly recent blog post on cravings. In fact, it's probably still on the group linked to it as well. So you should be able to find it fairly easily. But there's quite a lot of information there on cravings, but it's not directly to do with the subconscious. All the subconscious does is put the thought of an alcoholic drink in your head. And to be honest, in this society, you don't need that anyway, because, social media, TV, radio, music, books, everything's got people drinking in it anyway. So even scrap the subconscious triggers, you're still going to be thinking about alcohol an awful lot of the time anyway. I know you've covered it, but I still see confusion regarding disease, addictive personality, hereditary, all bullshit. Laugh out loud and go. So, yes, right. So there is a few things to say on that. So I did a post recently about the whole childhood trauma thing, and essentially, I think people with trauma issues or PTSD or underlying mental health issues, they are going to gravitate towards addiction and drinking, purely because if you don't feel right, you're more likely to be reaching for something to sedate things or change how you feel. And alcohol is, at the end of the day, the easiest sedative to get your hands on. I mean, for most of us, it's just a question of popping up the road and getting some of it. So lots of people with underlying problems will gravitate towards addiction generally, and particularly drinking. But I think it's completely incorrect to say that all addiction is based in childhood trauma or, you know, mental health issues or whatever it is, because there's a simple chemical element to it. You take a drug, most people actually start drinking from a curiosity and because other people are doing it, rather than that they're morbidly depressed and they're trying to sedate their feelings. That's certainly how it worked for me. But of course, when the drink wears off, it leaves an unpleasant feeling. And when you have another drink, it relieves it. So over the years, that becomes increasingly ingrained in your brain. And eventually that morphs into addiction. And I don't think you need to have any underlying mental health issues. You certainly don't need to have, you know, some kind of hereditary genetic issue, because that's how every human brain reacts to alcohol. Every human brain reacts to alcohol in that way. Some people probably might react slightly differently, but we're talking about minuscule differences. The basic physiology remains globally for all 8 billion people on the planet. It really is that simple. The addictive personality one's slightly different, because with an addictive personality, how that comes about is, you know, like I drink and I smoke, so I cut out smoking and suddenly I find I'm drinking more, and then I cut out drinking and I find I'm smoking more, or then I'm eating loads of refined sugar, or, you know, your diet goes to pieces. And people start to think they've got an addictive personality because they give up one thing and then start consuming more of something else. But I don't see that as a personality issue. I see that as a coping mechanism issue. Okay, when you drink or smoke or any of these things, you become very conditioned to, whenever there's some stress or upset in your life, you reach for a drink or a cigarette or whatever it is. So what you get very conditioned to do is to consume something to change how you feel. So if you take drinking, for an example, if you have a bad day at work, you go home and you open a bottle of wine or pour a beer or whatever it is. When alcohol is no longer on the menu and you have a bad day, there's a marked tendency to use the same coping mechanism, but just with a different substance. So I can't consume alcohol to change how I feel. I'll have a cigarette instead, or I'll eat a chocolate bar, or any one of a million other things you can do. So that's what it is. It's a coping mechanism. And the problem is, it's not personality, it's just that, and you can change that. So this is why I say to people, when you quit drinking, you do need to realize that life is better, but you still have bad days. Everyone has bad days. When the bad days come, you need to work out beforehand, how am I going to cope with it? Am I going to smoke a load of cigarettes or eat loads of chocolate, both of which will ultimately leave me feeling worse? Or am I going to do something that actually does make me feel better, like go for a run or go for a walk or read a book or whatever it is? So you need to develop these coping mechanisms. One of these coping mechanisms is meditation. All meditation is, not that I've ever done it, I might be speaking out of turn here, but my understanding of it is you just concentrate on your breath or something specific and you empty your mind of everything else. So what you're really doing is just emptying your mind of all your problems, all the stresses and strains that are going on around you, and just focusing on the moment and just emptying out. It's very similar to me for what I do when I'm running, because when I'm running, I just empty my mind of everything. I don't do it deliberately. It's just what I do. And similarly, reading a book, you pick up a book and you start reading it, and you become hopefully so embroiled in the story that you just forget everything else. It's all to do with putting the stresses and strains of life to one side. You can do that with a hobby or something. So when I'm talking about coping mechanisms, it doesn't have to be like yoga or meditation. It just, you just need to think to yourself, what did I do before I started drinking that I used to enjoy doing? You know, it might be sport, it might be gaming, it might be reading, it could be anything, but just think back to it and start doing that again. So when the bad times hit, you can just take yourself away, because what you're really looking for is something that you enjoy and engages you to take your mind off your problems. Okay, if it's cigarettes and chocolate, it's ultimately frustrating, not very rewarding, and it's going to leave you more unhappy than you were to begin with. But you do need to adopt those different coping mechanisms. This is an interesting one. I would like to discuss the benefits of not drinking past 1 year to keep me motivated. I'm going on 17 months alcohol free, and with the COVID still continuing, my motivation is slowly dwindling. So I kind of find that a bit confusing, because I don't understand how drinking is going to improve anything, to be honest. There's a thing called pink cloud, and it's used when people quit a substance and they're really happy and really euphoric about it. And it's almost used like it's a false high, and then you need to prepare for when it ends, because then you come crashing back to reality. I don't see it like that at all. I see the pink cloud as the reality. But the problem is, with any reality, when it's constant, it becomes unnoticeable to us. So I've used this example before, but if you're sat there wearing clothes, you don't physically feel the clothes touching your skin all the time. But if you stop and concentrate, when you move, you can feel the clothes rubbing against you. But because they're there all the time, you stop becoming consciously aware of them. Now, when you're constantly interrupting the chemical balance of your brain, you're going through lows and then anesthetizing those lows so you feel slightly better, but you're constantly going up and down emotionally. When you stop, you level out and you become much stronger mentally than you've been in years, and life just looks so much more livable and you feel so much more capable of dealing with it. That's the reality, and that's the pink cloud, because everything just feels so much better. But the problem is, because it just goes on and on and on, you start to take it as normal. That just becomes your norm. Okay, and at the same time, fading effect bias and ambition. In fact, there's a question on fading effect bias, so I'll come on to that in a minute. But fading effect bias is basically how we look back on things in the past more positively than when we actually experience them. So the problem is, while this great high of not being constantly interfering with your brain's chemical processes is a really good feeling, because it's constant, you start to take it for granted. And then you start to look back on your drinking much more positively. You forget all the bad parts and start to fantasize about that it was actually really nice. And then very soon you can start to get dragged back into it. So that's what fading effect bias is. There's another aspect which I call ambition, but I kind of mean it just for how we're always on the lookout to improve our lives. So I don't personally see that as a bad thing. Sometimes people say, I think there's something wrong with me because I'm always striving for the next thing, like I quit this and then I want to quit that, and then I want to do this and I want to do that. And I think, well, that's not a bad thing. Wanting to improve your life constantly is not a bad thing. But that sort of driving force is made up of two things. It's made up of being very critical of what we have and fantasizing about what we don't have. And it's that kind of carrot and stick that keeps driving us forward, because we're always looking at the next thing thinking, oh, that'd be great. When I get that, I'm finally happy. And then we get it and we think, well, okay, now what's next? So it's those two things. So the problem is, when we quit drinking, we have sobriety and we don't have drinking. So we start to fantasize about our drinking. It's just a natural thing to do. It's complete nonsense, of course, because if drinking was all it was cracked up to be, we'd never have quit in the first place. So we forget all the bad and we start to fantasize about how good it was. And that's the thing. And that's what I think you should bear in mind. If you're talking about keeping motivated and your motivation is dwindling, so you're going to go back to drinking, think about what you're going to go back to. At the moment, you're presumably sleeping quite well. Your mental health is all right. Your mental resilience is up there because you're not constantly messing around with it. You're going to go back to lying awake, riddled with anxiety at night, hangovers, feeling miserable and anxious and tired all day, for the dubious pleasure of just anesthetizing those feelings for a few hours before going back to bed and having another obnoxious and unrestful night's sleep. So I think you need to maybe start being a bit more realistic about what life would be like if you were drinking. Next question, how long does fading effect bias last? Almost 15 months alcohol-free beside a few slip-ups, and I still get fading effect bias out of nowhere, even though I know that alcohol won't bring me anything good. So fading effect bias doesn't end. It's just a mental thought process. It's how we look back on the past more positively. You just need to be aware of it, is what it is. It's like sort of looking through a lens at something and it being warped. You just need to be aware of it. You just need to know that when you think back on life as a drinker and think how wonderful it was, that it wasn't at all. And you just need to keep with the reality of it. If you're getting fading effect bias, i.e. you're suddenly thinking, oh, it'd be really nice to have a drink, just think about the reality, because it is fairly straightforward with alcohol. That's the good thing with alcohol. It's not a particularly pleasant drug in terms of how it makes you feel. It's not much. It makes you feel slightly dulled and confused and tunnel visioned. The main benefit of it is when you've had a drink the night before and you're still anxious the following day and you have another one to relieve that anxiety. The only other aspect of it where it feels really good when we drink is when we're socializing. So human beings are designed to socialize. We evolved as social creatures. So when we are relaxed and socializing, we get an endorphin rush. So your brain releases endorphins, but you have to be relaxed and socializing to get that endorphin rush. So when we go out with people, we're usually slightly nervous to begin with, and we have to sort of settle into the evening. Now, what can happen when we drink alcohol? Alcohol can sedate the feeling of nervousness, which allows the endorphins to flow. So when we're out for an evening drinking, we get a really good, happy feeling, but that's not to do with the alcohol at all. That's to do with the endorphin rush we get from socializing. So that's not an alcohol high, although it's often confused with it. So I would say you just need to stick with the reality of it all the time and not get sucked into the fantasy. The next one, I put a post up this morning that a few people identify with, so maybe you could give us some words of wisdom. I've stopped daily drinking. I drank daily for around 6 years. This year I stopped doing that, but I still find myself drink on average every 7 to 10 days. Just once, then I stop. I can't seem to break this cycle. After reading your book and learning about alcohol, I was able to stop daily drinking, thank God, but I'm stuck at cutting it out completely. I don't crave alcohol when I'm not drinking. Any advice appreciated? So the 7 to 10 day cycle is a fairly common one. And what it is, so when you're drinking, you're interrupting your brain's chemical balance and you start to feel sort of less mentally resilient, more mentally weak. Things just look a lot more scary for you. And it's just a sort of an anxious feeling. And when you drink, you then relieve it. Okay. It also damages your sleep and ruins your sleeping patterns. So when you're drinking alcohol, you're quite a few points below where you should be mentally. Okay. And the lack of sleep is going to impact that as well. So when you stop, after a couple of days, your brain chemistry gets back to normal. Then you start sleeping better. And then you start feeling better all around. You start to feel really good. Now, that for some people can be a danger point, because when you're drinking, you're with the reality of drinking and it's not very pleasant. But when you stop after a few days, because you start to feel much better and you cope much better mentally, there's a few things that happen. Firstly, you start looking at your drinking a lot more robustly. So you think, you know what, it's not a problem. It doesn't matter, because you feel that. And secondly, you forget how bad it feels when you're actually drinking. It's very difficult for us to relate when we're feeling well mentally to how we feel when we're not feeling well mentally, if that makes sense. So that can be a kind of an ongoing thing. And that's what a lot of weekend drinkers do. That's something I used to do. I'd drink, feel awful afterwards, get better for a few days. And by the time Friday came round again, I was all like, it's not a problem. It's fine. I'll just get on with it. So that's a dynamic it might be worth just bearing in mind. There's a similar one here. I'm the same. I appreciate some tips on how to deal with those niggly thoughts that still associate alcohol with fun, relaxation, enjoyment. They're the ones that still sneak up on me almost 3 months in telling me a glass of wine on Saturday night or Sunday afternoon won't hurt. So I would say there, understanding the chemical nature is quite important, because one glass will hurt because it's going to wear off and leave a feeling of anxiety that will need another one. So this is how I see one glass. A lot of people kind of have one glass as like the Holy Grail. You know, if only I could just have one, everything will be fine. I don't see it like that at all, because I see it as that one glass. Firstly, I haven't drunk for years, so I have no withdrawal or anything to relieve. So the sum total feeling that alcohol would give to me, it's not a great euphoric feeling at all. It's just a feeling of being slightly dulled and confused. Okay, so it's not a particularly pleasant feeling, but then it will wear off and it will leave an unpleasant feeling, because it will leave that feeling of anxiety. And then, as I said before, simple choice. Do I just sit there and suffer that feeling of anxiety, or do I have another drink and get rid of it, and then another and another and another, and I'm right back to where I started? And that's how I see it. And even if, say, for example, I had that one drink, I'm then spoiling my night's sleep anyway. So what am I getting out of it? I'm getting a not particularly pleasant, dulled feeling, then an anxious feeling, and then a bad night's sleep and feeling washed out the next day. The other thing to bear in mind with alcohol, one drink accelerates your heart rate. If you've got like a Fitbit or a fitness tracker, have a look at what alcohol does to your heart rate. It's horrendous. It puts it up through the roof. Now, when your heart rate increases, your body tells you to sit down and rest. And the higher it goes, the more strongly that urge to sit down and rest kicks in. When you drink alcohol, it makes you want to sit down and rest because your heart rate goes up. And it's why people think alcohol, the big killer with alcohol, is the liver. It's not. The biggest cause of death associated with alcohol is cardiovascular, because it accelerates your heart. If you accelerate your heart through exercise, your heart becomes stronger and you become fitter. If you accelerate your heart rate without exercise, if you do it through a chemical, it does the opposite. It actually erodes your fitness. The point there is, with fitness, rather interestingly, one of the main physical differences between someone who's fit and someone who is unfit is that people who are fit, their blood cells are younger and they group together more. So they have more, so the red blood cells carry oxygen and nutrients around the body. When someone's fit, they have many, many more red blood cells, and they're younger. The younger ones carry more oxygen. So every pump of the heart gets much, much more oxygen and nutrients around your body, because there's a higher concentration of red blood cells. If you're accelerating your heart rate all the time without associated activity, there's an excess of oxygen and nutrients going around. So the blood cells do the opposite. They grow older, because it's, when they die, they're replaced. So they grow, they're allowed to live longer, and they spread out more. So you're actually eroding your fitness by drinking, and that's just one glass. So I just don't have this whole thing with one glass. I see one glass as pretty much as repulsive as getting horrendously drunk and having a massive hangover. There's a couple of posts here about eating. My question for you is, how do you cope with the subsequent overeating I'm now dealing with? And I think someone else put, I'm 40 days alcohol free, but going through tremendous sugar cravings, which results in eating lots of unhealthy stuff. I've just downloaded Diet and Fitness Explained, but haven't started it yet. Any tips? Yes, start it and read it. So sugar cravings. So cravings are cravings across the board, whether it's for sugar or alcohol or anything else. So it might be worth having a read of that post on the website about cravings, because I go into a lot of detail there. As I say, I did this in one of the previous talks, so I won't go into it again now. But it's exactly the same thing with sugar. Sugar has a similar effect to drugs, in that it gives you a high with then a corresponding low afterwards, because your body releases, the sugar goes into your bloodstream, and your body puts insulin into your bloodstream, and insulin allows the sugar to be taken out of your bloodstream and used by muscles. The problem is the refined sugar goes into your system too quickly, so there's a spike in insulin, and then it takes out because there's a lot of insulin going in to cope with the extra sugar that's all flowed in at once. when that sugar runs out, the insulin's still taking sugar out, so you then go into a crash, and the easiest way to cope with that crash is to have more sugar. So it's kind of a similar addiction to alcohol, in that you get that supposed high followed by a kind of a crash. So it is a similar thing with sugar. Bear in mind, there's good and bad sugars. There's naturally occurring sugars. They're not refined, so they don't have that same spike and crash. And I know it might sound weird, but try and eat some fruit or something instead, because it has that sweet feeling without all the refined sugar in it. Just see, this is an interesting one. I've been alcohol free for 18 months and I'm so proud of myself. Well, that's fantastic. Well done. I also know that I never want to drink again, which is great. My life is better than I could ever have imagined it would be. Well, that's all very positive. However, I'm quite a serious person most of the time, although I do have a good sense of humour. But when I had a few glasses of wine in me, I was able to get in touch with my fun side very easily and become less inhibited, especially when I was socializing or on a date with a man. I miss this aspect of myself and wonder if I will ever be able to lose some inhibitions and be carefree whilst maintaining my sobriety. I know you may not have any answers, but putting it out there is somehow helpful to me. Thanks for all the support you give to us, William. I'm truly grateful. So I haven't got any direct answers, but I kind of did a similar thing. And what I found personally is it's very easy to remain inhibited, and it takes a conscious effort sometimes to lose those inhibitions, but you can do it. So I think sometimes you just need to do something a bit silly and go with it. And sometimes that's enough to just let your hair down and go for things. I think it kind of goes back to what I was talking about before. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you think you need alcohol to relax, if you don't have alcohol, you're not going to be relaxed because you're going to be worrying about it. So sometimes you just need to let yourself go. I would just practice doing silly things. I know it might sound a bit weird, but if you're out with friends or anything, just do some impulsive and strange things, because I think that can kickstart things and let things flow a bit. This is one. Are a blinding headache normal? I'm day 12, also drinking low alcohol. A lot of people love it. And there was another one here as well, someone asking about, I think they said their husband was, my husband is on day 3, no booze. He's feeling absolutely exhausted and fatigued. I know it's natural when stopping drinking, but can you remind me why it happens? I'm coming up to 7 months sober and can't really remember about the initial tiredness. I feed him information from you, so this would be really helpful. So I think the timeline for quitting is on the website, but essentially it goes back to the physiology of alcohol being a sedative and your brain becoming hypersensitive to counteract it. I'm assuming your husband and the other person here who's saying about a blinding headache are regular daily drinkers, because I've talked about the physiology, how alcohol's a sedative and your brain looks to counter it by becoming overly sensitive. So when the alcohol wears off, you're left with that withdrawal and anxious feeling. Now, if you're drinking daily, the withdrawal usually hangs around for a day or 2 or 3. So usually what happens is when you stop drinking, obviously the alcohol has to leave your system. Then that oversensitization's got to correct itself. But if you're a regular daily drinker and have been for years, your brain will have been in that oversensitization phase virtually non-stop. Because, as I say, it takes a few days for it to go back to normal. So when you're drinking regularly, you're putting new alcohol in before it's got back to normal from the previous dose. So it's almost a constant thing. So this is why regular drinkers believe they enjoy alcohol so much. It does really give them a feeling of relaxation, but it's just constantly relieving the withdrawal that's constantly building up from all the drinks they're drinking. So when they do finally quit, for the first time in years, the brain comes out of that oversensitization stage. That oversensitization stage and anxiety, it's very similar to drinking. I don't know if you've ever had far too much caffeine and it's just that horrible, anxious, don't know what to do with yourself kind of feeling. and it's a similar thing when your brain finally comes out of that for the last time. It's the equivalent as if you're drinking 7 or 8 cups of coffee every day and you suddenly cut it out. You feel really tired. So if you are a binge drinker, when you quit, the alcohol has to leave, the oversized sensitization has to disappear, then you need a couple of good nights sleep and you're back to normal. But if you're a regular drinker, you've got an extra phase to go through, which is getting used to your brain suddenly not having to be oversensitized anymore, which it hasn't done for years. And that's a period where you feel really lethargic and tired. So if you're a daily drinker, what you find is you'll feel anxious for a day or two and maybe not be able to eat, and you'll find sleeping very difficult. But then after that, you go the other way and you just feel exhausted. And that can last anything up to 2 or 3 weeks. The worst I've known anyone have it for was about a month. So it's not particularly pleasant time. That's also what causes the headaches as well. It's just that feeling of being really, really tired and drained. It does eventually leave, but that's the reasoning behind it. It's that physiological thing. Just seeing if there's any comments or whether to. Let's have a look. So I think I've done this one. To be honest, I think I've got through most of them. Yeah, there's a couple here. People are asking about cravings. And again, do have a look on the website for that on one of the previous talks. So this is an interesting one. I'm day 12 and feel just nothing special, have dull headaches and mild depression on and off. Do I just have to tough it out until 3 or more months have passed to feel euphoric? So again, on the assumption that you are a daily drinker and have been for a while and you've stopped, day 12, I would be expecting you to feel drained and tired and not particularly good. So the question is, the answer is yes, you do have to tough it out. If you're on day 12, you're probably way over halfway and you're certainly through the worst of it. It will start to be tailing off soon. Feeling euphoric, again, a lot of the problems, and this is another of the problems with alcohol, if you go about stopping the wrong way, you can miss the benefits. Because if you're stopping believing that actually you need alcohol to cope with the good times and the bad times, and you need it to socialize, and you're not going to drink again, but you're not going to enjoy social occasions, and you're not going to enjoy Christmas, and you're not going to enjoy holidays, and life's going to be a load of old rubbish, even though there's some very real positive gains physically, like correcting the chemical imbalance and getting some decent sleep and all of these other great things that make you feel a whole world better. If you're just miserable and angry because you can't drink again, you're going to miss all of that totally. The other aspect of this is it's gradual. Okay, you may feel rubbish when you wake up the next day after a drink, and if you have an alcoholic drink, you immediately feel lots better, and you can very much see that alcoholic drink gives you that benefit. When you stop drinking, it takes a few days or weeks to get back to it. So although it's constant, and it's the equivalent of having the benefits of having a drink, but all the time, it's very easy to miss it. So you need to look out and concentrate on the gains and always sort of be aware of them. But as I say, in answer to this question on day 12, on the assumption that yes, you were a regular daily drinker, having dull headaches and mild depression on and off is pretty much, unfortunately, par for the course. It will get better pretty soon. Something that can help massively is, don't forget what I was talking about before, try not to get sucked into trying to drink too much caffeine or smoke loads of cigarettes or eat loads of sugar, because ultimately that doesn't help things. If you're going to do something or you feel the need for a boost, try and do a bit of exercise, and depending, that might be a short walk or it might be a run or whatever you can do. Exercise does really help because it helps you sleep and sleep properly. But also when you exercise, your brain releases adrenaline and you get oxygen pumping around you. So it actually makes you feel more awake naturally. So if you're on day 12 and feeling rubbish, you might find a bit of exercise makes you feel a bit better. But yes, you do have to tough it out, but it's not 3 or more months at all. I would expect maybe another week or two at the outside, and you should be feeling massively better. I hope that's all right. I think that's pretty much done. I've covered not all the questions, but most of them. A lot of them were kind of repetitions of different themes I've touched on anyway. So hopefully that was useful. Have a good weekend, everyone. I will be back next Friday, and I will probably do a post something or other about Christmas timings, because I think if I continue doing Fridays, I'm going to be doing one on Christmas Day, which I don't really mind doing, but I thought maybe one Christmas Eve or something might be better, in which case I'm kind of thinking about what time would be useful. But I'll probably do a post in the group and canvass opinion on that. Have a lovely weekend, and I will see you all next week. Bye.